Man seeks solitude in mountain cabin. What he found was an ancient dragon. Jake had never been one to shy away from isolation. The noise of the city, the constant hustle, and the pressure of work had become too much for him. He needed a break, a place where he could be alone, think, and find peace. So he did what many people only dream about. He packed his bags, left behind the crowded streets, and rented a small cabin in the mountains. It was far from civilization, tucked away in a remote corner of the world where no one could disturb him. The cabin was old, but it had charm. Wooden beams stretched across the ceiling, and a fireplace crackled softly in the corner. It felt warm, welcoming, and perfect for someone who wanted to escape from the chaos of life. Jake smiled to himself as he set down his bag and looked around. It had been a long drive, but it was worth it. The cabin was everything he had imagined and more. The thick forest outside, the tall trees, and the quiet mountain air were all so different from the noise of the city. He unpacked his things, made a small dinner, and settled into the comfortable armchair by the fire. The evening was calm, the only sound the crackling of the flames. Jake could hear nothing else. No cars honking, no voices shouting, just the soft whisper of the wind outside. It was exactly what he had wanted. A place to unwind, to breathe, to be alone with his thoughts. But as the night grew darker, something felt off. Jake couldn't quite put his finger on it, but the silence seemed heavier than it should be. The wind that had been gently blowing earlier now seemed to pick up, rustling the trees outside in a way that was almost unnatural. It wasn't the kind of wind that he had expected. It howled and the trees creaked as if they were alive. But Jake shook off the uneasy feeling. He was just being paranoid. Too much time alone had made him imagine things. He decided to go to bed. He turned off the lights and climbed under the warm blankets, his body sinking into the softness of the bed. His mind wandered for a while, thinking about his life back in the city. He had always been too busy to appreciate the small things, the simple moments of peace and quiet. Maybe this trip would change that. He could finally relax. But as he lay there in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside, something happened. The floorboards in the cabin creaked. It wasn't the usual sounds of an old house settling. This was different. This sound was deliberate, like something or someone was walking on the wooden floor. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He sat up straight in bed, listening. The sound stopped. A heavy silence fell over the room. Maybe it was just an animal outside, he thought. Maybe a deer had wandered too close to the cabin. Still, the hair on the back of his neck stood up. He knew the sound hadn't come from outside. It had been inside, just under the floorboards. Slowly, Jake got out of bed and grabbed a flashlight from his bag. He crept cautiously toward the door, his feet barely making a sound on the wooden floor. The wind howled outside, shaking the cabin with its force. The noise seemed louder now, more urgent, as if something was trying to get in. Jake opened the door to the main room, shining his flashlight into the shadows. Everything appeared to be in place. The fire was out, the room dim and quiet. But then he heard it again, a soft, low growl. It came from deeper within the cabin, from behind the walls. His heart raced. He felt the sudden urge to run, to grab his things and leave, but something stopped him. Something told him he needed to figure this out, to understand what was happening. The growl grew louder, followed by a sharp scratching sound, as if something was scraping against the walls, trying to escape. Jake's flashlight flickered, and for a moment he thought he saw a shadow moving across the room. His grip tightened on the flashlight, his pulse quickening. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had started. A deep, unnatural silence followed. It was then that Jake noticed something he hadn't seen before, a small crack in the floor near the fireplace. It wasn't large, but it was enough to make him wonder. He bent down, shining the flashlight into the crack, but all he could see was darkness. Then the silence was broken again. A deep rumbling roar echoed from deep within the mountain. It was low, almost vibrating the air. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding him, filling the cabin. Jake's eyes widened in shock. This was no animal. This was something much bigger. His mind raced. Was it possible? Could it be a bear or some other creature? But that roar, it sounded like nothing he had ever heard before. It was ancient, powerful. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he realized something. He wasn't alone in these mountains. Something, or someone, was watching him. He backed away slowly, the roar still echoing in the distance. His breath quickened. Was he in danger? Had he made a mistake by coming here? The peaceful solitude he had longed for seemed like a distant memory now. The only thing that filled his mind was one question: what was living out there in the mountains? Jake wasn't sure if he wanted the answer, but deep down he knew he would have to find it. There was no turning back now. Jake sat in the corner of the cabin, his hands gripping the flashlight so tightly his knuckles were white. The distant roar had faded into an eerie silence, but it hadn't brought peace. If anything, it only deepened the mystery, the fear gnawing at him from the inside. His heart thudded in his chest as he thought about what he had heard. It wasn't an animal. It couldn't be. The noise was too deep, too powerful, and too ancient. What kind of creature could make such a sound? The wind howled outside the cabin, rattling the windows, but Jake barely noticed. His mind was consumed by the sound that still echoed in his ears. He had to know more. He had to understand what he was dealing with. With a deep breath, Jake rose from the chair and made his way to the door. The cabin was cold, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. As he stepped outside, the forest seemed alive with movement. The trees swayed under the weight of the wind, their branches creaking. But there was something else, something off about the air. It wasn't just the wind or the forest. There was a presence. Jake could feel it, like an invisible force pressing down on him. It made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Jake stepped forward, his boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. He walked toward the back of the cabin, where he had noticed the overgrown vines earlier. He had thought it was just part of the wilderness, but now it felt different. The vines seemed to pulse with life, like they were hiding something. A shiver ran down his spine as he reached out to pull them aside, revealing a narrow opening in the rocks. It was a cave. The darkness inside seemed to swallow the light from his flashlight, as if the very air inside was different from the outside world. A strange chill seeped into his bones as he peered into the darkness, the silence heavy around him. For a moment, Jake hesitated. Something told him not to enter, that this place was not meant for him. But the curiosity gnawed at him stronger than the fear. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air was damp, cool, and smelled of earth and something older, something ancient. His footsteps echoed in the narrow tunnel, the sound bouncing off the stone walls. As he walked deeper into the cave, the temperature dropped even further, until he could see his breath in the cold air. He felt as though the walls were closing in on him, though there was no visible sign of danger. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, winding deeper into the heart of the mountain. Suddenly, the path opened up into a vast chamber, and Jake's flashlight caught something that made his heart race. The walls of the chamber were covered in intricate carvings, strange symbols and pictures of dragons. But it wasn't just the carvings that caught his attention. It was the size of the room, the sheer scale of it. It was as if this hidden space had been built for something enormous. And then, at the center of the room, Jake saw something that made his blood run cold. A massive stone pedestal stood in the middle of the chamber, and atop it lay a golden amulet. The amulet glowed faintly, pulsing with a strange, otherworldly energy. It seemed to call to Jake, pulling him closer. He stepped forward, unable to resist, his eyes locked on the amulet. There was something mesmerizing about it, something that made him forget all the fear and uncertainty that had plagued him since his arrival. As he reached out to touch it, the air around him grew heavier. The walls of the cave seemed to vibrate, and the ground trembled beneath his feet. A low rumble echoed from deep within the earth, as if the mountain itself was awakening. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he pulled his hand back, realizing that his touch had triggered something ancient. Suddenly, a sound like 1,000 whispers filled the air. It was low and guttural, like the voice of the mountain itself speaking to him. The whispers grew louder, surrounding him, growing in intensity. Jake's eyes darted around the chamber, but there was no one there. Just the carvings, the pedestal, and the amulet. Yet he could feel eyes on him, watching him from the shadows. The whispers suddenly stopped, leaving a deafening silence in their wake. Jake stood frozen, his breath shallow and fast. He couldn't understand what had just happened, but he knew one thing for certain. The mountain wasn't empty. There was something here, something old, something powerful. The silence was broken by a loud cracking sound. The stone pedestal shifted, and Jake's eyes widened as the golden amulet began to glow brighter. The ground beneath his feet began to shake, the tremors growing stronger, and then, without warning, the cave started to collapse. Rocks fell from above, crashing to the ground with a deafening roar. Jake stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned to run, but the way he had come was blocked by falling debris. His flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls as the rumbling continued. He had to get out. He couldn't stay here. The mountain was alive, and it wanted him gone. He sprinted toward the only remaining exit, a narrow passage at the far side of the chamber. The ground shook again, and rocks tumbled from above, blocking the path behind him. The whispers returned, louder now, as if the mountain itself was angry at his presence. Jake barely made it out of the cave, gasping for breath as he emerged into the cold night air. He looked back at the mountain, the entrance to the cave now hidden beneath a pile of rubble. The sounds of the collapsing cave faded, leaving only the wind and the strange, unsettling feeling that he had just uncovered something far older and far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. As he stood there in the moonlight, Jake realized that his life would never be the same. He had discovered something ancient, something that could change everything, and whatever it was not going to let him go. The night was cold, the air thin, but Jake could barely feel it as he stood at the edge of the mountain, his mind racing with what he had just uncovered. He looked back toward the collapsed cave, the dark silhouette of the mountain looming ominously in the distance. The whispers still echoed in his head, lingering like a shadow he couldn't shake. There was something in the mountain, something alive, something ancient. His heart raced as he stumbled back toward the cabin. He could barely think. Every step he took felt heavier than the last. The mountain felt alive beneath his feet, like it was breathing, watching him. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see something following him, something watching him from the darkness. But when he looked, there was nothing but the thick forest and the quiet hum of the wind. Jake reached the cabin, his mind still spinning. He slammed the door shut behind him, locking it with trembling hands. He took a deep breath and sat down at the table, trying to calm his racing heart. The fire that had once comforted him now flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the room. He knew what he had felt. The amulet, the whispers, the shaking of the ground, it wasn't a coincidence. The mountain wasn't just a mountain. There was something deep within it, something that had been waiting, something that was waking up. A low growl echoed from the forest. Jake's blood ran cold. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was the sound of something, watching. And then suddenly he heard it again, the deep rumbling roar from within the mountain. This time it was closer, louder, more intense. It wasn't just a sound. It was a signal, a warning. Jake grabbed the flashlight from the table and rushed to the window, looking out into the dark woods. The trees were still, unnaturally still. The wind had stopped and the air felt too thick, too quiet. He scanned the forest, his eyes darting back and forth, waiting for something to appear, but there was nothing. The roar, however, continued to vibrate through the ground, deeper, louder, like a pulse echoing from the earth itself. Suddenly, the light from his flashlight flickered and died. The cabin plunged into darkness. Jake froze. His breath caught in his throat. There was no power here, no reason for the light to go out. Panic set in, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had to find out what was happening. There was no way he was going to leave this place without answers. He lit a match and held it to the wick of a nearby oil lamp. The soft flame illuminated the room, casting a flickering, shaky light. He grabbed his coat, and before he could second-guess himself, he headed for the door, determined to uncover whatever was lurking in the darkness of the mountain. Outside, the night air was colder than before, biting at his skin as he stepped into the woods. He followed the faint glow of the oil lamp, trying to push the fear from his mind. Every crackling twig, every rustling leaf seemed to make the world feel like it was closing in around him. The mountain wasn't just a place. It was alive. The wind whispered through the trees, not in the soft voice of nature, but in the low growl of something much older. The further Jake walked into the woods, the louder the roars became. They no longer seemed like distant echoes. They felt like they were coming from beneath his feet. The ground trembled lightly beneath him, and every step he took seemed to push him closer to the source of the sound. He reached the base of the mountain again, the dense forest surrounding him. There, hidden beneath a thick blanket of vines, was another entrance. This time there were no cracks, no gaps in the rock. It was as if the earth itself had shaped it, smooth, untouched, waiting for someone to discover it. The entrance was enormous. It looked nothing like the cave he had discovered earlier. The walls of the opening were smooth, carved with symbols that shimmered faintly in the dim light. They seemed familiar, but Jake couldn't place them. They weren't of any language he recognized. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he stepped closer, drawn to the entrance. His heart beat faster, his palms sweaty. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, but curiosity had taken hold. He needed to know what was inside. He pushed aside the vines that shielded the entrance and stepped through, entering another vast chamber deep within the mountain. The space was unlike anything he had ever seen. The ceiling stretched high above him, disappearing into darkness. The walls were covered in shimmering crystals that glowed softly, casting a surreal light across the chamber. At the center of the room stood a massive stone structure, like an altar, covered in intricate carvings of dragons, gods, and strange symbols. The air inside the chamber was thick, heavy with an ancient power that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. Jake could feel the energy in the air, thick and oppressive, like the room itself was alive. And then, he saw it. The creature was lying in the shadows, its massive body coiled around the stone altar. Its scales glimmered in the dim light, reflecting the shimmering crystals. Its eyes were closed, but Jake could see the faintest movement of its chest. The creature was breathing. It was alive. A dragon. Jake's heart skipped a beat. It was enormous, far larger than anything he had ever imagined. Its wings, curled against its body, seemed like the wings of a mythical beast powerful enough to lift the entire mountain. The creature's skin was a deep, dark blue, and its scales shimmered with an iridescent glow. But what struck Jake the most were its eyes. Even though the dragon was asleep, or so it seemed, Jake could feel its gaze on him, as if it were aware of his presence even in its slumber. And then, in a moment that would haunt him forever, the dragon opened its eyes. They were ancient, filled with knowledge that no mortal could comprehend. The golden irises locked onto Jake, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to stop. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He was frozen, staring into the eyes of something that had existed for centuries. A deep, rumbling growl escaped from the dragon's throat. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. Jake took a step back, his breath catching in his throat, but the dragon didn't move. It didn't attack. Instead, it just stared, its gaze heavy as if waiting for Jake to make the next move. Jake didn't know what to do. He had found what he was searching for, but he wasn't sure he wanted to face it. The dragon had awoken, and something told him that this was only the beginning. There was more to this mountain, more to this creature than he could ever imagine. Jake's heart hammered in his chest as he slowly backed away from the ancient dragon, his mind racing. The creature's eyes never left him, their golden depths intense and unblinking. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, to flee from the danger that stood before him. But he couldn't, not yet. Something held him there, as if the dragon's presence had woven an invisible thread around him, keeping him in place. The growl that had escaped from the dragon's throat reverberated through the chamber, echoing off the crystal-lined walls. It wasn't a threatening growl, nor was it a plea. It was something different, an acknowledgement, an invitation. For a moment, Jake felt as though the dragon was speaking to him without words. Its gaze seemed to pierce through him, reading his every thought, his every fear. "Are you real?" Jake whispered, his voice barely audible in the vast space. The dragon's massive head tilted slightly, as though considering the question. Then a rumbling voice, ancient and deep, filled the chamber. "Real, yes, but also more than you understand." Jake stood frozen, his mouth dry. The dragon could speak, and it had chosen to speak to him. But what did it mean? More than he understood. What was this creature? Who? Who are you? Jake asked, his voice shaking. The air in the chamber felt thick, suffocating. Every breath he took was heavy with a sense of foreboding. The dragon's eyes glowed brighter as it lifted its head slightly, and a wave of power surged through the room. "I am Azure, keeper of ancient knowledge, guardian of this mountain and the last of my kind." Jake's mind raced as the words settled in. The last of his kind. That meant there had been others. Others like Azure. Others who had once walked these mountains, perhaps with powers far beyond anything Jake could comprehend. "Why are you here?" Jake asked, his curiosity pushing him forward despite the fear that still gripped him. Azure's eyes softened for a moment as if lost in a memory. "I have been here for centuries, waiting for the one who would awaken me. But you are not the one I expected." Jake's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" I'm just A man. I'm not special. I'm not destined for anything. The dragon's massive form shifted slightly, the sound of its movement sending a shiver down Jake's spine. You are more than you know, Jake. You are tied to this mountain, to its power, to its history. The moment you set foot here, the mountain called to you. It has chosen you whether you realize it or not. Jake could hardly believe what he was hearing. Chosen? By the mountain? It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, a legend. But standing in the presence of this creature, this dragon, he knew that whatever was happening was far from ordinary. He had never believed in myths or magic, but now he was staring at a creature that was a living myth. What was he supposed to do with this knowledge? Why me? Jake asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Azur's eyes glowed with ancient wisdom as it responded. The world is shifting, Jake. Forces older than even I have begun to stir. This mountain was once a place of great power, a place where knowledge and magic were kept safe. But over time, it was hidden, buried beneath the earth, and those who sought its power were lost to time. The balance has shifted, and now the power that lies within these walls calls for a new guardian, someone who can unlock its secrets and protect it from those who would misuse it. Jake's mind spun. Forces older than the dragon. A new guardian. This was too much to process, but there was no denying the weight of Azur's words. Something big was happening, and he had been pulled into it. But how? Why him? Before he could ask more, the ground beneath him trembled. The roar that had filled the mountain earlier was back, louder than ever, reverberating through the cavernous space. Azur's eyes narrowed, the glow within them flickering. The others have come, the dragon said, its voice laced with a deep warning. The ones who seek the power of the mountain. They will stop at nothing to claim it for themselves. They know I am here. They know I have awoken. Jake's heart raced again, the urgency in the dragon's words sending a chill down his spine. He had barely begun to understand what was happening, and now there were enemies. Enemies who wanted the same power that Azur had guarded for centuries. And if they got it, who knew what kind of destruction they could bring? Who are they? Jake asked, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. He had to know what he was up against. They are remnants of a forgotten time, Azur replied. Those who once tried to control the magic of this mountain. They are not human, though they walk in human form. They are beings of power, twisted by time and greed, and they will stop at nothing to reclaim what was once theirs. Jake felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. Twisted beings, not human, bent on controlling an ancient power. His mind raced, trying to piece together everything he had learned, but there were too many questions, too many unknowns. I don't understand, Jake said, the weight of everything becoming too much to bear. What am I supposed to do? I'm not a hero. I'm just a man. What can I possibly do against them? Azur fixed Jake with a steady gaze. You are the key, Jake. You may not know it yet, but you are the one who can stop them. The power of this mountain will flow through you, if you choose to accept it. You must embrace the bond between us. Only then can we protect this place and the world beyond. Jake felt a strange sensation deep within him, a tingling that spread from his chest to his fingertips. It was as though something had awakened inside him, something powerful, ancient, and beyond anything he had ever felt. The bond. The mountain had chosen him just as Azur had said. But could he truly accept it? Could he become the guardian the mountain needed? The ground shook again, stronger this time. The roar was closer, and Jake knew time was running out. Azur's voice was low, almost urgent. The choice is yours, Jake. Embrace your destiny or let the mountain fall into the hands of those who would destroy it. The power is within you. Jake's heart raced, but his mind was clearer now. He didn't know if he was ready, but he had no choice. The mountain, the dragon, and the ancient power, they were all part of something much bigger than himself. And somehow he was at the center of it all. Jake stood in the dragon's chamber, the weight of Azur's words pressing down on him like an invisible hand. The mountain's power surged within him, a force unlike anything he had ever felt. It pulsed through his veins, cold and ancient, filling him with an energy that both terrified and exhilarated him. He had agreed to take up the mantle of guardian, to protect the mountain. But now, with the ground trembling beneath him and the dragon's voice still echoing in his mind, Jake realized the enormity of the task before him. He wasn't just protecting the mountain. He was fighting to save the world from forces far older and more dangerous than he could imagine. The air in the chamber grew heavier, the temperature dropping as the crystal walls seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the mountain. Jake's breath fogged in front of him, and the glow of the crystals cast strange shadows across the cavern. The dragon's presence was overwhelming, and though Azure was quiet, Jake could feel the weight of his gaze, ancient, knowing, and expectant. "You are ready," Azure finally spoke, his voice like thunder in the vast space. "The trials begin now." Jake's heart skipped a beat. The trials. He hadn't been prepared for this. He had imagined facing enemies, fighting for survival, but this was something different. The mountain itself had chosen him, but he didn't know what the trials would demand of him. Azure's eyes glowed brighter, the intensity almost blinding. "The power of the mountain must be unlocked. You must prove yourself worthy of its strength. Only then can you defeat the ones who seek to claim it." Jake nodded, his mind spinning. The mountain, the dragon, the power, it was all so much to take in. But he had no choice. He had already accepted the responsibility. He couldn't turn back now. A loud cracking sound echoed through the chamber, and the floor beneath Jake's feet began to shift. A large stone slab rose from the ground, revealing an underground passage. The air smelled of damp earth and age-old dust, and a deep, foreboding feeling settled over him as the passage stretched out before him like a dark, yawning mouth. The trials, whatever they were, awaited him within. "You must follow the path," Azure's voice rumbled. "Each trial will test you, your strength, your mind, your spirit, and when you complete them, you will be ready to face what comes next." Jake took a deep breath, his body tense as he stepped forward. The path was narrow, the walls slick with moisture, and the air thick with the scent of ancient stone. He walked for what felt like hours, his flashlight barely cutting through the gloom. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the echo of his footsteps. The first trial came swiftly without warning. The passage suddenly widened, and Jake found himself standing in a vast cavern, the walls lined with strange symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. At the center of the cavern stood a pool of water, black and still, its surface like a mirror. Jake approached the water cautiously, his senses alert. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew that whatever lay ahead was not going to be easy. Without warning, the water began to churn. Ripples spread across the surface, and then something emerged. An enormous shadow. It rose from the depths of the pool, its form shifting and changing with each movement like a creature made of water and smoke. Jake instinctively stepped back, his heart racing. What was this? A guardian of the trial? The creature's shape solidified, revealing a monstrous figure, its body composed of liquid darkness. It had no eyes, no face, just a swirling mass of shadow that seemed to absorb the light around it. Jake's breath quickened. He had faced danger before, but nothing like this. His mind raced, trying to figure out how to fight it. The creature let out a low guttural sound, like a growl mixed with the sound of water rushing through a storm. It was coming for him. With no time to waste, Jake reached for the knife he'd brought with him, the only weapon he had. But as he drew it, the creature moved faster, its form blurring like smoke, circling around him, trying to strike. Jake swung his knife, but it passed right through the creature as if it were made of mist. He had to think quickly. This wasn't an enemy he could defeat with brute force. The creature lunged, its mass flowing toward him like a tidal wave, but Jake instinctively dove to the side, his heart pounding in his chest. As he hit the ground, the realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. The creature wasn't physical. It was an illusion, a manifestation of his fear. The ground trembled again, and Jake's mind cleared. He focused on the creature, shutting out the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. This wasn't real. This was a test of his mind, his spirit. He closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing, and reached deep inside himself. The power of the mountain surged within him, a cold ancient force, and he called upon it, directing it outward. The creature hesitated for a moment, and then with a sound like rushing water, it evaporated into the air, leaving only the still, black surface of the pool. Jake stood there, panting, his mind racing. The trial had been a test of his inner strength, his ability to control his fear. And he had passed it, but this was only the beginning. He knew that the trials would get harder from here, each one more dangerous and demanding than the last. As Jake continued down the path, his body exhausted but his resolve stronger than ever, he knew he was being prepared for something much greater. The dragon, Azure, had been right. This mountain held secrets, secrets that could change everything, and the enemies that sought its power were closing in. The next trial was already waiting for him, and Jake was ready. He had no choice. He was no longer just a man in the mountains. He was the guardian, and the fate of everything rested on his shoulders. Jake's body ached from the first trial, the physical and emotional toll heavy on him. He had barely caught his breath when the second trial began. He could feel it in the air, a palpable tension that settled in his bones. The mountain itself seemed to hum with anticipation, the whispers of the past growing louder in his mind. He had no time to rest. Whatever force was guiding him had already set him on this path, and now he had to see it through. The dark corridor he walked through felt longer than before, the walls narrowing with each step, closing in on him like the world itself was pressing down. The mountain was watching him, waiting for him to prove his worth. Jake had barely gotten used to the idea that he was now its chosen guardian. And yet, deep down, he knew this path was leading him to something much bigger, something far more dangerous than any trial could prepare him for. He turned a corner and entered another vast chamber. The ground was slick with frost, and the temperature had dropped so low that his breath formed clouds in the air. It was as though he had entered the heart of winter itself. A thick fog rolled across the floor, shrouding the room in a ghostly mist. Jake's steps were silent, his feet sinking slightly into the cold ground with each movement. At the center of the chamber stood a stone platform, covered in runes that glowed faintly under the fog. The air hummed with an eerie energy, and Jake felt the unmistakable sense of something ancient watching him. His instincts screamed that he wasn't alone, but the mist obscured his vision. As he stepped closer to the platform, the fog parted, revealing a figure standing motionless at the center. At first, Jake thought it was another trial, a test of his courage. But as his eyes adjusted to the low light, he realized it wasn't just a figure, it was a person, an old man, dressed in tattered robes that seemed to ripple like fabric in a windless room. The man didn't move as Jake approached, his eyes closed, as if in deep meditation. There was something unsettling about his stillness, something that made Jake hesitant to get any closer. But curiosity and the pull of the mountain's power urged him forward. "Who are you?" Jake called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "What is this place?" The old man's eyes opened slowly, revealing eyes that glowed with an unnatural, fiery red light. His gaze locked onto Jake's and a cold shiver ran down his spine. The old man smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was a grin filled with knowledge of something far beyond Jake's understanding. "You seek to understand the mountain's power," the man rasped, his voice like the cracking of ice. "But do you understand the cost of it?" Jake felt the weight of the question, its gravity sinking in. He didn't have an answer, but he had to ask. "What do you mean? Who are you?" "I am the keeper of the mountain's dark secrets," the old man replied, his smile fading into something darker, more sinister. "And you, young one, are but a pawn in a game that has been played for centuries. The power you seek comes with a price that not even the strongest of men can pay." Jake felt a sharp pang of fear at the man's words. Something in the pit of his stomach told him that he was about to be tested in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The mountain's trials were not just about strength. They were about the very essence of who he was, his will, his heart, and his ability to make impossible choices. The old man's form flickered, shifting and twisting, as if he was not entirely real, but a projection, an illusion of the mountain itself. "The trial you face now is not one of strength," the man continued. "It is a trial of the soul. You will be faced with a choice that will determine the fate of the mountain and everything tied to it." Jake stepped back, his heart racing. "What choice?" The old man raised a hand, and the fog thickened, swirling around them in a blinding whirlwind. The world seemed to tilt, the ground shifting beneath Jake's feet as though gravity itself was bending. The fog lifted just as quickly, revealing a vision, one that sent a chill running through Jake's veins. He was standing on the edge of a vast battlefield, the sky above him dark and filled with swirling storm clouds. The ground was cracked and burning, the air thick with smoke, and in front of him stood an army, a horde of creatures, their bodies twisted and warped by centuries of greed and darkness. These were not ordinary men or beasts. They were the ones who sought the mountain's power, the ancient enemies Azure had warned him about. Their faces were a mixture of human and something else, something monstrous. Jake's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The army was coming, and there was only one way to stop them. The old man's voice filled his ears, low and cold. "You see them, don't you? The ones who will stop at nothing to claim the mountain's power, They will burn everything, destroy all that you hold dear. They know the truth, Jake. They know that the mountain's power can give them immortality, control over time itself, and they will stop at nothing to get it. Jake's mind raced. These were the enemies Azure had warned him about, the ones who would do anything to claim the power of the mountain. The very power Jake had been chosen to protect. You have a choice, the old man said, his voice growing colder. You can fight. You can stand against them and protect the mountain, but it will cost you everything, your life, your soul, or you can surrender. Give them what they want and they will spare the world. For a time, Jake stood frozen, torn between the two choices. If he fought, he might lose everything, his life, his freedom, maybe even his humanity. But if he surrendered, what would happen to the world? What would happen to the mountain? To the power that lay within it? The old man's gaze intensified, and Jake felt the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a mountain. The fate of the world rests in your hands. Choose wisely. Suddenly the vision faded and Jake was back in the chamber standing before the stone platform. His heart raced as the echoes of the old man's words lingered in the air. He had seen the enemy, had seen the destruction they would bring if they claimed the mountain's power. But could he bear the cost of stopping them? The fog began to dissipate and Jake's thoughts were a whirlwind. The old man's warning, the vision of the battlefield, the decision he now faced, everything seemed to press in on him, suffocating him. He didn't know what the right choice was. All he knew was that time was running out. The enemy was closing in and he had to act. But the price of victory, if he could even achieve it, was more than he could bear. The mountain trembled beneath Jake's feet, and the air seemed to crackle with an energy he couldn't fully comprehend. The fog that had once engulfed him had dissipated, leaving him standing in the heart of the mountain, the stone platform before him now silent and still. His breath came in shallow gasps as the weight of the vision, the warning, and the choice pressed down on him. The battlefield he had seen in the vision lingered in his mind, haunting him, a twisted reflection of what could be if he failed. He could still hear the old man's words echoing in his mind. You have a choice. The mountain's power, his responsibility, was now a burden too great to ignore. Could he fight the ancient enemies, knowing the cost might be his own soul, his very life? Or could he surrender, let them claim the power and hope they spared the world? Both choices led down dark paths. Both choices had their consequences. The weight of it all felt unbearable. Jake clenched his fists, staring at the stone pedestal. He had already made it this far. He had survived the trials, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The ground beneath him shook again, this time violently. The roar that had echoed through the mountains returned, louder, more furious than ever. It was the enemy, the army he had seen in the vision. They were here. Jake's heart raced. He turned to Azure, who had been silent, watching from the shadows of the chamber. The dragon's eyes gleamed with ancient wisdom, but also a deep sorrow. The time had come. There was no more running, no more hesitation. Do you understand now, Jake? Azure's voice was low, reverberating through the chamber like a distant thunderclap. The mountain calls for its protector. It has chosen you. But the power within it is not just a gift. It is a responsibility. You must wield it or it will be lost forever. Jake swallowed hard. His thoughts were a blur, his body tense with the pressure of the moment. The enemy was coming for him, coming for the mountain. He could feel their presence, their hunger for the power that lay within these ancient walls. They would stop at nothing to claim it. And if they did, everything would be lost. I can't do this alone, Jake muttered, more to himself than to Azure. I'm just a man. The dragon's deep eyes locked with his, full of understanding. You are not just a man. You are the guardian now. You are the one who will stand between the mountain and those who seek to destroy it. You have already begun to understand the power within you. Jake's mind swirled with doubt. The vision of the army haunted him. The weight of the decision felt suffocating. But as the roar of the enemy drew closer, something inside him shifted. This was no longer just about him. This was about the future, about the world that lay beyond these mountains. He had seen what would happen if the enemies claimed the mountain's power. The destruction, the chaos, the endless darkness. He couldn't let that happen. He had to stop them. But to do that, he would have to risk everything. His life, his soul, his very humanity. A voice deep and primal surged within him, the mountain's power calling to him, urging him to embrace his destiny. The air around him thickened, the runes on the stone platform glowing brighter, the walls of the chamber shaking as if they, too, were waiting for him to make his move. Jake closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He felt the cold power of the mountain surge through him, flooding his veins with an ancient energy. It was overwhelming, but it was also comforting. It was as if the mountain had become a part of him, its strength flowing through him, making him more than just a man. He was the mountain's guardian now. With a firm step, he raised his hand to the stone pedestal. The air crackled with energy, the very earth vibrating beneath him as the mountain responded to his touch. He felt the power course through him, filling him with a strange sense of purpose, of clarity. The choice had been made. The trial was over. And then the sound of marching feet broke through the tension. Jake turned. The enemies were here. The chamber's entrance, once a dark, silent passage, now filled with the menacing forms of the ancient enemies, twisted, dark figures who had once been human. Their bodies warped by centuries of greed and hunger for the mountain's power. Their eyes burned with fury, and their hands grasped weapons forged from the very darkness of the mountain itself. They had come to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. Jake stepped forward, his chest swelling with newfound strength. His mind was clear now. He wasn't just protecting the mountain. He was protecting everything. The world. His people. The future. This was his fight. The first enemy rushed toward him, a hulking figure clad in shadow, its movement swift and terrifying. Jake raised his hand, calling on the power of the mountain. The air shimmered, and the ground beneath him cracked as a surge of energy shot from his palm, slamming into the enemy like a wave of force. The creature staggered back, its body recoiling from the raw power Jake had unleashed. It roared in fury, but Jake didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, pushing through the fear and doubt, his eyes locked onto the enemy in front of him. He was no longer just a man. He was the guardian of the mountain, and nothing, no army, no darkness could take that from him. One by one, the enemies fell before him, each strike fueled by the mountain's power, each movement a testament to his transformation. The battle was fierce, and though the enemies were many, Jake's resolve never wavered. He was fighting for something greater than himself. He was fighting for the world, but even as the last of the enemies fell, Jake knew the true battle was not over. The mountain had chosen him, but it had also burdened him with a responsibility that would last for eternity. He had defeated the ancient enemies, but the power of the mountain would always call to him. The Guardian's work was never done. As the dust settled, Jake stood amidst the ruins of the battle, breathing heavily, the weight of what he had just accomplished sinking in. The mountain was safe for now, but Jake knew that the world was ever changing, and new threats would always emerge, and he would be ready. Ajar's voice echoed in the chamber, proud yet tinged with sorrow. "You have done it, Jake. The mountain is safe. But remember this, the power you hold is not yours alone. It is the world's, and you, as its guardian, must protect it." Jake nodded, the weight of his new role settling onto his shoulders. He had made his choice. He had fought for the mountain, for the world, and he had won. But the trials of the Guardian had only just begun.